You're uneducated trash. That's what you are. My father said it in front of 11 relatives at my own grandmother's 80th birthday party, with a paper plate of potato salad still in his hand. Nobody at that table said a word in my defense. Before I tell you what happened years later, when my parents showed up at my office begging for help, let me tell you where this all started and why those 5 words changed the entire direction of my life. My name is Russell. I'm 41 years old now, but I was 23 the day my father said that to me, and I have replayed that birthday party in my head more times than I can count. I grew up in a house where one thing mattered above all else: grades, test scores, college acceptance letters. My older sister Brianna was the one who got those things easily. She read early, tested well, and got into a state university on a partial scholarship at 18. My parents talked about her acceptance letter for months. They put it in a frame. I was a different kind of kid. Not slow, I want to be clear about that, but our house was loud and unstable in ways that made homework hard. My father worked 2 jobs for years. My mother cleaned houses on weekends. I was the one who picked my younger cousin up from school some afternoons because nobody else could. I was the one who learned how to fix our water heater off a YouTube video at 16 because we couldn't afford a repairman. Nobody ever called that an education, but it was one. I struggled in school, not because I didn't try, because trying and circumstances are 2 different things, and nobody in my family ever seemed to understand the difference. I graduated high school with a C average and no plans for college, and that was the moment my value in my parents' eyes got permanently filed under disappointment. Have you ever been compared to a sibling your whole life and always come up short, no matter how hard you worked? Tell me below. Because what happened at that birthday party is the moment I finally understood exactly where I stood. Brianna had just finished her master's degree that spring. She was 26, engaged to a man with a law degree, and my parents could not stop talking about her. At dinner, every dinner, for years, the conversation eventually circled back to Brianna's accomplishments the way water circles a drain. I was working as an apprentice electrician at the time, 23 years old, putting in long hours, studying for my journeyman license at night. I was proud of what I was building. I thought, naively, that showing up to my grandmother's party with steady work and a plan might finally earn something resembling respect. My aunt asked me, kindly enough, what I was doing these days. I said I was working toward my electrician's license, training under a master electrician, building toward owning my own contracting business someday. My father laughed. Not a warm laugh. The kind of laugh that exists to embarrass you in front of a room. He said, an electrician. While your sister's getting her master's degree. He shook his head. He said it loud enough for the whole table to hear, loud enough that conversations at other tables paused. I said, Dad, it's a good trade. I'm doing well. He said, You're not doing anything, Russell. You're an uneducated kid playing with wires because you couldn't get into a real school. My mother didn't defend me. She looked at her plate. I said quietly, That's not fair. That's when he stood up. That's when he said the words in front of everyone. You're uneducated trash. That's what you are. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise in front of this family. The room went dead silent. My grandmother, 80 years old, sitting at the head of the table, didn't say anything either. Nobody did. I left the party that night and drove home, and the next morning my father called me and told me to come get my things out of the house. He said I was an embarrassment, and he didn't want to explain me to anyone else ever again. I had $400 in my checking account and a car that needed new brakes. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later. I want to tell you what those first months were like, because I think people who haven't lived it imagine struggle as one big dramatic moment. It isn't. It's smaller and longer than that. It's sleeping on my coworker Danny's couch for 6 weeks because I had nowhere else to go. It's eating ramen for dinner 4 nights a week and telling myself it was temporary. It's calling my mother once, just once, 3 weeks after I left, and having her tell me that maybe if I'd taken school seriously none of this would have happened. I never called again after that. I finished my apprenticeship. I got my journeyman license 18 months later, working double shifts and weekends, studying in my car during lunch breaks because Danny's apartment was too loud to focus in. I got my master electrician's license 4 years after that, the hardest exam I have ever taken in my life, and I remember sitting in my truck in the parking lot afterward crying because there was nobody to call who would understand what it meant.
Stay with me.
Because what happened over the next 12 years is something nobody at that birthday party could have predicted. I started my own electrical contracting company at 29. 3 employees the first year. I worked harder than I had ever worked, took every job nobody else wanted, built a reputation for showing up on time, and doing things right the first time, which sounds simple until you realize how rare it actually is in that business. By 34, I had 18 employees. By 37, I had landed contracts with 2 regional developers building senior living communities across 3 counties. By 40, my company had done over $4 million in commercial work that year alone, and I had quietly purchased the building where my first shop used to rent space, the same building where I'd once swept floors for a master electrician who believed in me when my own father didn't. I never contacted my parents during any of this. Not once. I built an entire life, and they had no idea it existed. Meanwhile, from what I eventually learned through cousins who still spoke to me occasionally, Brianna's life had taken a different shape than the one everyone expected from the golden child. Her law degree husband left after 4 years. She changed careers twice. She started a consulting business that failed within 18 months after she'd convinced our parents to invest their retirement savings into it. My parents bragged about her the entire time, even as things were unraveling. Even when, according to my cousin Denise, they were quietly worried about money in ways they never discussed openly. If you've ever wondered whether the people who underestimated you would eventually have to face what they got wrong, subscribe. Because what happened next, nobody in my family saw coming. My parents found out about my life by accident, the way most uncomfortable truths surface. A regional business magazine ran a feature on companies that had grown significantly during a difficult economic stretch, and my company was one of 4 featured. There was a photo of me standing in front of our shop, the same shop my father had once called playing with wires. My aunt, the same aunt who had asked me kindly what I was doing all those years ago at that birthday party, saw the article and sent it to my mother. I don't know exactly what was said in my parents' house that day. I only know that 3 weeks later, my father called me for the first time in 12 years. I almost didn't answer. He said, "Russell, it's your father." I said, "I know who it is." There was a long pause. Then he said, "We saw the article about your company." I said, "Okay." He said it had been a long time and that he and my mother had been thinking about me and that maybe it was time to talk things through as a family. I said I appreciated the call, and I would think about it. I did think about it, for 2 weeks. And then he called again, and this time the reason for the call was different. But that wasn't even the worst part, the part where they only remembered I existed once they needed something. Brianna, it turned out, had taken out a significant loan against my parents' house 2 years earlier to fund a second business venture, with my parents as co-signers because the bank wouldn't approve her a loan. The venture had failed completely. The loan was now in default. My parents were facing the real possibility of losing the home I had grown up in, the same home I'd been told to never set foot in again 12 years earlier. My father, on that second call, asked if there was any way I could help. I said, "Help how?" He said maybe I could talk to my bank contacts. Maybe I could co-sign something. Maybe, given how well things were apparently going for me, I could simply help with the debt directly. I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, "Dad, do you remember what you said to me at Grandma's 80th birthday?" He didn't answer right away. I said, "You called me uneducated trash, in front of the whole family, and then you told me to never come back." He said very quietly that he remembered. I said, "I'm not calling to be cruel right now. I'm telling you because I need you to understand something. I built everything I have without you. Not despite some momentary disagreement, despite being told, explicitly by my own father, that I was worthless because I didn't have a degree. I am not the same uneducated trash you described 12 years ago. But I'm also not going to pretend that conversation didn't happen just because you need something now." He started to apologize. I could hear, underneath it, the the specific desperation of a man who had run out of other options. I told him I would think about what, if anything, I could do. I did help, eventually, not because they demanded it and not in the way they expected. I paid for a financial counselor to help them restructure what could be restructured, and I covered enough of the gap to keep the house out of foreclosure, structured as a loan with real terms, the kind of arrangement Brianna had never once offered to honor with anyone. I did not move back into that house. I did not pretend the last 12 years hadn't happened. I see my parents now, occasionally, at a distance that I control and that feels survivable. My mother has apologized more sincerely than my father has, though I'm not sure either of them fully understands what those years cost me. Brianna, and I don't speak much. I don't think she's figured out, even now, how to exist in a family where she isn't automatically the standard everyone else gets measured against. I think about that birthday party sometimes, the potato salad, the silence at the table, my grandmother not saying a word. I think about $400 and a couch and a journeyman exam I studied for in a parking lot. What I know now that I didn't know at 23 is that the people who call you trash are usually just describing the limits of their own imagination, not the truth of who you actually are. I built a life. Quietly, slowly, on my own terms, with my own hands. And in the end, the uneducated trash is the one who kept the family's house standing. That's not revenge. That's just what happens when you stop needing someone's permission to be enough.